coming to an end, and before saying goodbye, we'll have a moment to wrap up this session. You brought important issues relative to the relationship of, and I say relationship because I'm humanizing AI, okay? But the interaction of the AI system and humans. You brought some cases and some concerns of its use, and now it's time. If you want to add something, any comment, any concern, any question, this is the time. Yes, Anders?
I could add one to follow up from the question Gerhard asked Muge, and Carlo also followed up, because we've done some experiments with training one of these large language models, the ChatGPT, for with local examples, and see if those will able to be taken into account for new work. And it's very difficult because these pre-trained models are enormous, right? Even if you add your own local database or specific documents, in our case, it would be possible if you also pre-prompt with an instruction to tell you these are specific prompts you need to use or to set it into in order to get into that part of the model, so the extension will hit so you can use it. So it's possible, but it's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So that's so it's possible to incrementally update a large language model, but it's very challenging too. Just this last part. So I think maybe the future will be have smaller models and not rely on giant models, but have smaller models you can get onto your own computer, which is suitable for specific domains.
Maybe to switch from one model to another one. That will be perfect. I mean, the possibility to switch among different models.
Thank you.
You go ahead.
Yes.
May I, Lilian?
Yes, of course.
Oskar, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing a lot of interesting tips that came in today. Once again, we at this moment, what I feel in related with my research in human-centered AI, something that I would like to call like next generation AI, as Europe is also labeling everything around there, or in some instances calling it and thinking of it as a next generation AI, and what just Anders mentioned goes in that direction. We, of course, are still astonished with what came in these this optimization. As you were mentioning, AI is around for decades, being used for military use for more than 3 decades. And so what we are getting now is something into the public domain, but with gigantic, it's not huge, it's really just gigantic data sets that are training or were training these models. And that, of course, it's amazing, as we saw some examples here today. But of course, they have no context. Transparency, like it was also mentioned today, has a bigger problem. Carlo was mentioning, yeah, well, we already have some organizations, mainly companies, industry, that are taking on OpenAI models, not the data training sets, but the OpenAI models, and training them with their specific data sets for business purposes. And they are having a lot of success doing that. But of course, it's money that generates money. If we want to take this into public domain, into schools, like we had an example here today, a creative process, or into smaller businesses, as is today, is extremely difficult to start from a reset point, from a 0 point, and getting a data training set to really train your model and get it in the purpose of your business or of your goal or inside your classroom and so on. So I believe that what we heard here today is really all the concerns for a very emergent next step that will also need something that I think none of you mentioned, but I think has to go into the research agenda very quickly. Most of us come from the HCI area also, human-computer interaction, which is getting an interface to also have access to the models. We have to be able to understand what are the taxonomies. We also have to understand all the ethical issues in getting the database for the training data sets, and of course also the outputs. There, as you know, nowadays it's a black box. Only anyone who understands the maths, the model, and of course the computer science will be able to set up such a thing today. We really have a lot of work to work with these guys and open up an interface, get the transparency of the model, taxonomies, the inputs, how the data set, how the databases can be built on. And that I think is still a lot to be done. And I think most of us, looking at your expertise and background, we have a lot to do. That's just these comments I would like to share with you. And once again, thank you very much for sharing your work with us.
Yes, Gerard?
So it relates to what was just said, and namely, to which extent do we as individuals or research groups have some control and influence? And I must say, I sometimes, when I have given talks, I finished with claims that the future is not out there to be discovered, but it will be designed. And then a follow-up question is, designed by whom? And what your arguments was, well, we as academics seem to lose some ground of making our voices heard because there are these astronomically large models. But I would emphasize, and maybe this is particularly a question to Carlo, I read the New York Times, I read Time Magazine, I read the major German newspaper. There are articles about AI every day, more or less. And we as academics, I mean, I have a lot of friends, colleagues who work on what you just mentioned, human-centered AI. But academics are totally absent of these publications. And so, for me, the question is, shouldn't some of us not try to attempt, based on what we did in this context, also, make an attempt and write something for whatever, the New York Times, because I think we as academics have not contributed our concerns, our ideas, the possibilities, the pros and cons to this discussion. And I assume many of you will also read these articles in your own respective newspapers and so on. And I don't know how big you, Carlo, and I think this was a great session, I feel, getting us as the authors together, but what will, be the impact beyond the academic community? And do we also have a responsibility to go beyond our own little favorite journals to say, yeah, this is a big discussion, we should contribute to it?
This is an interesting, in my opinion. But I would like also to say that before I mentioned the European Act about artificial intelligence, and I would like to know European about it, because actually this is the product of also the intervention of academics. Of course, also industries are behind that kind of act, but this certainly takes in consideration many concerns that are proposed by the academic environment. And recently, we have performed an, let's say, study just to know what the actors in the school thinks about, okay? And what's happened is that actually the topics on which the actors, the students, teachers, principal are concerned are much more limited with respect to what is proposed to the attention of everyone by the academics. So, for example, the actors in the school actually really does not care too much about problem about gender bias or other ethical aspect, apart a general worry about privacy, for example. They are much more concerned on practical application, what they can get out from by using, for example, ChatGPT or whatever you like. So you mean there is a very big difference between the level of discussion in academics and the level of discussion by the potential user. So I really don't know if the intervention of academics could be very useful. Certainly, it is important, in my opinion, to support a critical discussion at all levels in order to make people maybe reflect on the different issue. For example, I can also say you that most of the people do not care at all about the possible consequence of the climate. I mean, the energy that artificial intelligence needs, apart from the students, because they are very sensitive to the environment problem. So you see, I think that at present there are different levels of discussion, and the question is really maybe how also academics can contribute to discussion, but in a such way that the two levels of discussion try to align. That's at least my opinion. I don't know what the other thinks. And in my opinion, as I said before, the European Act is really an example of academic influence that is not really completely perceived by the end users.
Joan?
Yeah, so I agree with you, Gerard, on the kind of basic premise that we have to contribute in more ways than producing knowledge. So I think I agree there. However, the problem, I would say, I rarely read Time magazine, but if you look at the Swedish debate, it's highly polarized. So to come into the debate and enter the debate without taking on one of those positions, in Sweden at least, that would be quite difficult. So I mean, what we try to do are other ways to be part of making changes. So I mean, we contribute through, I mean, maybe most obvious through education at the universities, through constructing educational materials, through proposing concrete solutions that can be implemented in systems, through taking part in policy bodies and so on. But at the moment, at least from my perspective, it's quite difficult to take a stance in the debate around AI in education, AI in society, or digital technology in education, at least from a Swedish perspective, that proposes a more nuanced view, because it's a position that requires more thought and more difficult kind of approaches than the two sides that we see at the moment. So, but I would be happy to be part of kind of a writing project aiming for an outlet like that. But I think it's also important to keep working on other levels of impact around the research. And in particular, I would say that what the research around me, and maybe if I would kind of sloppily talk about us as part of the same domain or field, is that we, to a much less extent, build things that change the world than compared to what you did or what we did 20 years ago. We investigate and explore systems, we design educational activities, but we do not engage similarly as researchers did into building new things, or not enough at least, because I think that could really have a great impact on education. And I was, when listening to Anders and the work that you talked about kind of building models, I was thinking, well, it's probably possible or even easy to make systems that automate prompts. So maybe that's kind of an entry point into the large models, to build kind of meta systems that communicate with the language models and automate prompts for local users. I think that could be an interesting design venture. Yeah, so just some thoughts. Thank you for having these grand ideas, Gerard. It's great for me to hear them.
Well, I make only one more remark, because quite a bit of Italian representation. I learned from the Italians that there was a time, sometimes in 2023, where Italy made a statement that ChatGPT is not allowed at all levels. I collected a document from the president of the University of Tübingen saying in our university, ChatGPT should not be used. And I feel this to have a principled argument where our insights are presented to such decision-making process. I feel this is a responsibility from us as academics, that we contribute to this discussion. And I don't know exactly how much I mean, Carlo, you mentioned this several times, and I mean, this is well known, the EU Act on AI, how much different voices were heard there. But in the discussion about this, the academic community, I mean, was pretty much absent again in analyzing the implications, what is good about it, and maybe should be further improved. So in some ways, I think this is currently such a huge movement that we as academics, you know, should say, yeah, we want to contribute to this in an essential way. That's just sort of my personal belief.
Carlo, do you want to? Oh, Professor, yes.
Just a contribution to what Gerard just mentioned. Here in Portugal, Gerard, we have like mixed feelings, because no one's getting any issues or problems with ChatGPT, for example, or other generative AI models. But in some of our public schools, high schools and middle schools, the mobile phones, smartphones are prohibited inside, even some schools, not just class. They are not allowed to use them in school. Well, of course, there's always a context for this. Saying this like this can be very vague, and there are some good reasons for some schools to do this, and they have alternatives and so on. But anyway, it's food for thought in one way, having this. And let me just share you another concept that I was kind of listening to what Ingeborg, and then the discussion with Carlo, when you mentioned the critical thinking. And I think there are an upskill that we have to do with students. And you were mentioning, Johan was mentioning our students in all subsystems, not just university, much before getting to university, which is really the critical thinking skill. And that makes all the difference. I agree with you. And I remembered some decades ago, Roger Silverstone introduced the concept of domestication of technology and media. Maybe some of you remember this concept of domestication that Roger Silverstone introduced. I think we just have to add on critical domestication of AI technology. And that's something that that will make the difference when it gets down to really the learning processes in university and of course in other subsystems. Is today we had an example of a creative context, in fact more than one. And if there's something that really keeps us very different of any other kind of technology we have nowadays, is this completely unpredictable reaction and behavior we have as rational humans. And the creative, whenever we need to innovate, getting something new or rebuilding on existing knowledge. So the creative process makes all the difference if the human is in the process. And this, one of the major skills in order to do this is really being able of having the critical thinking in place and knowing how to do and to get this skill engaged. So what started with your presentation, Ingeborg, and then the discussion that Carlo brought in was inspiring. And I just remembered this Roger Silverstone's domestication of technology and media, which with this new technology, not new technology, it's, as some of you mentioned, it's not new, but as it came optimized to public domain now after some decades, I think we really have to be very serious with critical domestication of AI instruments. And that will be a major difference working with our students. Okay, what I'm just sharing with you is with, and we can make a difference doing that. I use with my university students AI. They are free to do it. They just have to share with us. It's official inside University of Aveiro here in Portugal. In any thesis, dissertation, whatever, they can use AI tools. They just have to mention they used it and how they used it. That's the major difference. So they are free to use it in whatever level of study, bachelor, master's, or PhD. But once again, it has to be very clear where they used it and how they used it and why they needed to use it. Where did it innovate with it, with that instrument? That's the first steps. This is very new for us also.
Okay, Carlo, you want to add something? I know. You're muted. We can hear you, but
okay, I have just one more additional comment. I would like just to make note, underline that critical thinking is strictly related to the to the competence that has been put forward by Gerald at the beginning. Trading off between augmenting and reducing. And I would like just to come back to the example that has been mentioned by Gerard about, for example, navigating. Okay, and I can assure you that people certainly will lose his ability to navigate. I observed my wife, and my wife is releasing completely to Google Maps and the ability to navigate with Google Maps, what the Google Map offers. And she does not learn any longer path. They do not. She doesn't remain any longer new path, and she does not realize any longer the path proposed by Google Maps, because she's fully confident that Google Map will choose the best path. But actually, sometimes this does not happen at all. So this just to say that we really should analyze which is the trade-off point. And just imagine, for example, my wife when the battery of the smartphone gets empty. She will be completely lost. Okay, so this is just my additional small comments about critical thinking and trading off between augmenting and decreasing the ability of the people.
Okay, that's good. So, well,
John maybe was
yes,
No,
Joan.
no, never mind. This can go on forever. Let's meet instead.
Are you sure?
One last
Yeah,
comment,
I'm sure.
Johan.
I'm sure.
Okay.
Okay, well, so we'll just wrap up. Thank you very much for this session and for your contributions and bringing up this discussion.